Today is Wednesday, March 4th, and as I always say, it's a beautiful day to have a webinar. I'm John Yarrington, CEO of the Performance Marketing Institute, a 501c6 not-for-profit trade association dedicated to protecting, promoting, and advancing the direct-to-consumer and performance-driven marketing industry. And on behalf of the entire PDMI family, it's my pleasure to welcome you back for yet another fun-filled and exciting episode of the PDMI Take 20. As a reminder, the PDMI Take 20 is a quick-hitting roundtable discussion led by industry experts on trending topics, all in roughly 20 minutes. Today, we're joined by three amazing industry friends, including Bill Harvey of RMT, Dan Fairclough of Media.net, and Ben Nichols of Taboola. And in the first episode of the three-part Shoppability series, today we'll be taking a look at how performance brands are finding success using contextual advertising. However, before we get started, please allow me to do a little housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question, and we encourage you to do so, please use your questions tab located in your control panel. Also, please note, you're welcome to ask questions throughout today's conversation, but we will hold all questions to the end of our discussion this afternoon. Alrighty, with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. When he left the college, he told his dad, "You're the man of the house now." He's the fearless Chris Foster. Chris is Vice President of New Business at Modern Postcard, a direct marketing agency located in Carlsbad, California. In addition to his day job, Chris is the chairperson of the Brand Response Council, and he hosts the podcast, Men Folk Journeys. As always, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. And for the 134th time, because today is the 134th episode, take it away, my friend. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Johnny, so much for that fantastic introduction, and welcome, gentlemen. What a fantastic panel today to talk about contextual advertising. Now, the next generation of shopping is going to be fragmented at scale beyond anyone has experience. We've got a TikTok shop, we've got Instagram stores, we've got new in-app purchases. There are going to be more ways to buy and pay for products that will make it both harder and easier for advertisers to get in front of buyers. And as the savviest generation, Generation Z, amasses greater purchasing power, advertisers need to be more authentic and more relevant than ever. Gen Z buyers are looking beyond transactions. They want to have a connection with their brands. They want to have a relationship, and they expect those brands to market well. That means paying attention to where and how your brand is being seen. Fading are the days where you can drop an ad anywhere. Rising are the days where consumers expect to see your brand in context with the content so that it makes sense to them why they're seeing your ad, where they're seeing your ad. So we're going to dive into these masters of their crafts and talk about contextual advertising, why it's important, what it means for advertisers, and a future of making sure that your buyers believe in your brand and where it physically and digitally sits in the advertising space. So we're going to jump in. Let's get started. Please just tell us about your business and your role. Dan, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be here. Hey, guys. I'm Dan Fairclough, head of specialized demand at Media.net, an SSP focusing on everything in the open web, online video display, CTV, with a couple of tricks up our sleeve in terms of some great tools on the topic of exactly what we're talking about, the ability to utilize contextual in a powerful way and measurement in a powerful way. And to your point, also just finding the right person at the right time on the right screen on their path to purchase. And so I'll stop there before I start verbally vomiting all over everyone.
That's fine. I don't think with your kerchief you could ever verbally vomit, Dan. So Ben, let's start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys, and love the energy on the intro as well. So Ben Nichols, I'm a senior director at Taboola. We are one of the world's leading open web performance marketing platforms. Kind of bluntly speaking, what do we try to do? We help advertisers, achieve the same performance outcomes that they've become accustomed to on search and social, but doing that on the open web, within open web editorial, where audiences still spend 25-26% of their time. We're a publicly traded company, close to $2 billion in revenue, and like 95% of that is performance marketing. It's in our core, it's in our DNA, it's what we do. My role specifically is working with our large enterprise customers, so typically Fortune 1000 plus, and helping them to grow and really focusing entirely on performance marketing outcomes from consideration down to action.
Fantastic. Bill, you're up.
Well, Resonance Mapping Technology, RMT, is my company. What we've discovered is that context is even more powerful than anyone ever believed. That was proven by the probably largest brainwave study ever done by Wharton for Fox, and I was a consultant on it. And we found that the same ads performed from the bottom to the high, depending on the program lead-in. It changed everything in terms of performance. It seemed to be as powerful as the creative itself. What RMT does is it psychologically matches contexts. We rank contexts based on the ad. You give us the ad, we know which contexts are most psychologically resonant with that ad. And we have data to prove it from Nielsen, Advertising Research Foundation, Newstar, Simmons 605, and so on. So basically, we increase sales effect and branding effect. It doesn't depend on the ad being above average or the context being above average. We can take average context and average ad, and if they're matched to one another, the viewer experience will be, instead of the dissonance of an interruption, it'll be a continuation of the same psychological mindset that they were in during the program. And that will allow the message to get across.
That's brilliant. I love that. It's actually very human-centered marketing. You know, it is interesting where I remember one time when I was a youngster watching the news or watching something and it was disturbing or, you know, profound. And then right after that, there was an ad for Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I was like, it was so crazy in terms of the psychological shift that that advertiser was asking me to perform, where, you know, after seeing something really meaningful, you know, to be excited about a bucket of fried chicken was very, very tough to do, right? That's a pretty big leap. And now, of course, with, you know, the surge of digital impressions and the customization and the niche and the personalization beyond what linear can do, contextual ads seem to make the most sense. So, so Bill, you've developed these value signals for HBO and Bud Light, AMC, Fox, CBS, Sprite, and other really small niche brands. They seem to focus more on context quality. Can you explain that term and how it applies into the space we're talking about?
Well, what we're really measuring is the quality of the match between the context and the specific ad. So over time, the same context will look bad for this ad, but good for this ad, which is good for the buy side in the sense that you can't put a higher CPM on a particular context if it's good for some ads and not other ads.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some future AI bidding system will be able to figure out exactly how to do that. But in the current environment, the buy side can find what looks like a mediocre environment with a mediocre CPM or even a low CPM, but it happens to resonate with our. So you mentioned value signals. When we started this, we said the concept is good. We didn't know how powerful it was until this Wharton study, but the concept is good. It should work. And there's some literature that shows that stuff like this does work. That is, we saw funny ad works in a funny program, you get 15% more ad recall. That goes back 100 years. So we didn't know what will be the ways we need to match the ad to the program. We can think about it and we can make up words, you know, pacing, you know, lighting, sound level, celebrity, non-celebrity, all of that stuff. So we started with over 10,000 words, and in-market field testing and machine learning brought us down to these 265 that really work. And Wharton said, you know, there's just about the same number of what we call value signals in the brain that only appear during choice behavior. You may have found the names of our mysterious things in the brain that we only have numbers on. So we signed a 10-year contract with them to develop and see whether that's scientifically true.
I love it. That's incredible. I think that's brilliant. Like I said, it's very psychological. It's very human-centric because we're understanding more about the brain and why people do what they do and behaviors and choices that they make. And this seems to corroborate that kind of natural progression. Now, you did mention the two letters that everybody seems to be talking about in any conversation. So I'm going to ask, Ben, to talk about that, because when you use AI, the question is how you can actually accelerate some of the processing that you mentioned, Bill. So Taboola is using performance AI to help deliver targeted ads. I guess my question for you, Ben, is how do these new AI advancements help you place with even greater context and relevance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I'm just going to dovetail off Bill a little bit here and say, I think, the promise of AI is that it should help us deliver on a lot of what Bill's just spoken about, right? Now, kind of before I get into it, just, looking backwards to look forward. So from Taboola's perspective, specifically, even looking over the past 15 years, like context and relevance has obviously always been incredibly important to what we do, right? Like as a company, we're rooted in our deep supply partnerships, with the Yahoos, the ESPNs, the NBCs, the CBSs, and our code on page, deep partnerships with those partners. I think we lost Chris.
He's dealing
No,
with
I'm here. I just had to close my window.
Sorry, that's what sort of has enabled us to access premium supply, to access premium audiences, to build audiences based upon content consumption. That sort of cliche phrase that has gone around in the past of you are what you read, right? And we're very much taking those components into the future with AI, right? Like those are the building blocks that enable us to build more, and it's something that we're leaning into heavily. So specifically at Taboola, we currently have, I think today we have about 400 plus models, being trained daily. We're going through about 2 billion petabytes of data on a daily basis and making about 181 billion predictions per day. And I think context and relevance is an incredibly strong signal. And I actually think that AI is going to expand that definition and increase the relevance of context as we go forward. And I think context might change, and Bill alluded to choice behavior. Well, what is choice behavior driven by? It's not just what's on the page. It's what's the weather like? What time of day is it? Is that a time of day where you're open to making a purchase? Are you commuting on your train and have no interest in making a purchase? Well, that may vary from person to person, right? And I think AI sort of helps us deliver on that promise of personalization, right? Mm-hmm. So I think AI, and I hope, and I believe this as well, AI will actually increase the importance of context, and will hopefully move us away a little bit from this cookie-driven audience buying that is sort of, been one of the primary modes of transaction on open web advertising for the past decade, really, right? And I think we're going to see buyers increasingly looking for outcomes versus audiences, and we're no longer going to be just measuring, so what is the CPM efficiency against that audience? And again, my sincere hope is that when we come out of this, those placements, those premium placements that actually do drive better performance will be valued higher, and that'll be reflected in transaction costs, right? So look, from our side, I will just say that we are 100% doubling down on AI. I think context is an important signal, but so is intent. And where you really make magic happen is when you're able to effectively marry sort of context, relevance, intent, but then also creative at the same time. It's something that we're leaning very, very heavily into in tools that we're developing. And I have to say, since we've launched this over the past 6 months, the results have been phenomenal, like 26% uplift overall in performance across our network. So this is I'll kind of leave it there, because this is a topic that we could speak to for hours and hours and hours, and I'm sure it'll come up again. But
sure.
Bill, I kind of want to continue your thought, because I think AI hopefully will enable us to deliver on a lot of the things that you've spoken about, and frankly, bring more value into the ecosystem for premium context and relevance.
Yeah, and what it's interesting about that, Ben, is that you talked about kind of AI holistically making these vast improvements. And then the question I would have is, when you look at contextual ads, where they kind of fit within the funnel. So Dan, MediaNet puts ads in the right context at each stage of the marketing funnel. Is there a stage where you think contextual ads can be more influential, whether it's top, mid, or bottom of funnel within that buying process?
It's such an interesting question, and a way to dovetail off of what you were saying, Ben, so we could keep the cycle going. You know, as viewership has become more fragmented and content consumption has become more fragmented, and the ability to pinpoint where on the path to purchase someone made that decision. And to your point, Ben, who's to say maybe I heard an ad on a podcast on the train, but I wasn't really interested in buying, and then I searched for it on my iPad when I saw an ad, and then I saw it on CTV, and well, which one made me buy the Peloton? Well, maybe all of them did in some sense of the world. And so what I love about what we do here at media.net is, and it's funny, you know, I started my career at AT&T back when Uverse existed, and it was all about interactive TV and addressability. And then Hulu and CTV was a new thing. And how do we measure this? And the idea that I get to deliver an ad one-to-one and have that type of personalization, but how do I know that that person is actually making an action, and how do we close the loop? And I think that's what we're all trying to ultimately get to here, is understand what methods are ultimately driving us to success for these advertisers. What I love about what media.net is doing around contextual is, I would call it like supercharged contextual, or contextual, you know, on high, in that we're utilizing 10 years worth of search signal data from Yahoo and Bing and others to be able to find on a household level what folks have searched for, what they're interested in over the course of years, and utilize that and being able to pinpoint the type of inventory that maybe inherently wasn't what you were going to buy, even if you were doing a traditional contextual type buy in terms of trying to identify people into beauty and fitness or sports or you know, whatever it may be. And so with this, we're able to get a little bit closer to the actual context that these viewers are interested in, these consumers are interested in, and hopefully by way of that, hit them with the right ad at the right time in multiple parts of their path to purchase. And then in the end, hopefully having an offering like we have here with a product called Elevate, that we're able to actually close the loop and measure against that media, and be able to determine which folks actually made a decision, made a purchase, decided to buy a product, decided to subscribe and be loyal to this brand. And so we're talking about a magic alchemy elixir here that is continuously evolving. And all of it is so important. But it's funny that, and the reason I brought up my past journeys is, there's been so many buzzwords every year. There's a new buzzword, but contextual stays, and contextual is not going anywhere. And I think what's interesting to me is that it's now back in the forefront of what advertisers are finding to be, I think, most performative. And so I think folks who are able to use tools like AI to just supercharge that, folks who are able to find a way to close the loop on measurement and attribution by way of contextual targeting, that's, I think, a bright future for advertising, understanding what's working. And where the audiences are really watching.
You know, it's interesting. All of you guys have talked about kind of a similar through line, in that the data is available now, and that consumers actually, through their signals and buying intent and what they do, are able to show interest, predictability, kind of a profile of who they are as individuals, not necessarily just as household data, right? So, you know, Bill, you're the only one on this panel who's won an Emmy, so congratulations. I think that's awesome for your science and engineering. It seems to me now that your whole career has been about technology and data and connecting those things so that an advertiser can speak with more relevance and personality to the consumer. Do you think now does it seem to you like this golden age where finally the technology has been able to catch up to the data dreams that you've always wanted to realize?
Absolutely. You know, all action is driven by motivation. That's what brain science teaches us, that we're goal-oriented animals. And every action we take can be explained based on some drive we have inside of us, often subconsciously, that we don't even know we have. So you can ask people questions about their motivations, but you get kind of noise back as answers. And that's why motivational research, which was very briefly a big thing in the 1960s, disappeared. And we kind of brought it back because we found that it's possible to determine a person's motivations from the content they consume.
Right.
And the content they consume is psychologically rich. So it gives us a picture. And so in the US, we've got 300 million IDs, which we're tracking through our partner Samasio every second of every day. They do a full text grab of all the words on the page being downloaded by every download, every page viewed by that ID. Some of the IDs are people, some of them are devices owned by people and so on. Some of them are devices where several people are co-viewing. So we've got those usual complications. But when somebody gives us an ad, we can pick audiences for them. And like the New Star study found a 95% increase in return on ad spend, even though we were charging $1.50 data CPM, and we were competing against Google audiences that were given away free as a value add to the client. So we started from behind and wound up with a 95% higher ROAS despite that handicap. And for new to brand, it was 115% higher than the Google Affinity IDs. So now imagine if you put that together with context, not only reaching the people who are motivated by what's in the ad subconsciously or consciously, but also through a context that is also in perfect resonance with the ad. So we're just getting into that combination right now.
Right. It is a golden age of data and technology. I think that especially for what I think is interesting about that is for older, more seasoned veteran professionals who understand the data side of it and now are embracing the technology, they can say, here's how the technology can really apply to the data and all the learnings and the experience that I have on the human side. And then if you're a younger professional who's coming at it from the technology side and it doesn't have the experience, they can start learning about the data and learning about people. So I think that it actually bookends these generational professionals pretty well. So I guess, Ben, we have just a couple more questions because we're already 11:25. So Ben, are there products or markets that you avoid with contextual advertising or lean into, or does it such a wide swath that it applies everywhere?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it applies everywhere. I'm not sure that's necessarily because it's a wide swath. But I do think that like context and relevance, I mean, it's kind of like the heart of advertising. You remove the heart and the patient that tends not to survive, right? It's sort of a core critical component here. That said, I do think, and Dan, you alluded to this, and I agree. I think, look, I think where context can perhaps change in its value and importance is perhaps where you are in the funnel, right? And I think maybe if I were to think of, say, like an airline, right? Clearly, in the upper and mid funnel, context is really important. When you're getting down to point of purchase, someone is looking to book a flight, then data, retargeting, dynamic creative that shows pricing probably increases in paramount versus the contextual relevance of that ad. So I think it's relevant across the board, and it will continue to be relevant across the board. One of the through lines here, which I think is really interesting, is collectively we're all starting to think about context not just as an input, something you think of at the start of a campaign, but context as an output, a delivery from the campaign, and something that informs future decisions. And I think whenever we talk about contextual advertising, it's a really important thing to think about, right? Because we don't often know the context. Like obviously there are endemic contexts. Obviously then from that there are related contexts. But this is, I think, where whenever we're thinking about contextual advertising and relevance, the data, the insights, the learning is really important in terms of what do we want to do in the future? What have we learned from a campaign, and what do we want to adjust going forward into the future, looking at context as an output? So look, I think, yes, does contextual advertising have a place in every campaign? Absolutely. Does its value increase, decrease, perhaps where you are in the funnel? Yeah, that's probably a fair statement as well, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think that what you were talking about is the learnings from different campaigns. So Dan, if you could, I'd love to hear from you about one of the learnings that you gleaned from one of your campaigns that are contextual ad, where you're like, this is something that was unexpected, or this was something that I assumed, and maybe you were surprised by it or corroborated your assumptions.
I always love, I think we all are motivated, to your point, Bill, motivations, finding better ways so it could work a little smarter and not harder. And I think that some of the solutions that Media.net specifically has developed that I alluded to before around our search signals contextual offering has been able to do just that. I mean, it could be any category. We've seen success with pet foods. We've seen success with consumer cellular companies, travel. The categories are endless. I focus obviously on direct-to-consumer performance marketing, but also political. The ramifications for political are extreme. When we're talking about finding a finite audience, that it's table stakes to find as many eyeballs as possible. Identifying those corners of the ecosystem that we might not be aware that they might be present is table stakes in so many cases. And what we've seen by finding that many more eyeballs that maybe these advertisers weren't able to find through their tried and true methods, whether it's just applying first and or third party targeting within the DSP, or just doing kind of standard run of the mill contextual without a little bit of data to back it up. We've seen some extraordinary success. For example, with a leading pet food brand, and we did a campaign recently this year, 50% increase in ROAS, which is not anything to scoff. That's significant performance increases in quality performance. But a 29%, for example, reduction in cost per acquisition. When we're talking about these performance brands, the cost per acquired customer and then maintaining them is everything. And so if we're able to decrease their cost per acquired customer by 15, 20, 30%, well, then they get to put that money right back into working media and to find additional eyeballs and hopefully, obviously, attract more loyal consumers. And so what I find is there's obviously a bunch of ingredients to any winning formula, but stuff around contextual, I think, is more powerful than ever. And now getting to see some of the data around how much better performance it does drive when it comes to everything we were talking about before, and you led the conversation with this, Chris, is more so than ever, modern day consumers need to feel a loyalty towards a brand.
Right.
That they share their values, that they share their, that they're not full of it, that they're consistent, and that they're delivering a message that feels genuine. And so this is just an essential ingredient on that path for these brands to be able to do so. And I think to the whole point here, I think, is being able to tie it all together and showcase that because you were able to contextually find the right user, you've been able to significantly improve performance for the brand.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And also, too, you add more value to the consumer when the ad is placed in a situation and in a comfortable psychological space where they want to be a part of that brand, right? That makes a lot of sense.
And not something that they're being spoon-fed, of course, yeah.
Right. Well, guys, we are already at 11:30. I'm sure we have questions from the audience. Like we talked about, this is going an eye blink. That's because you guys are so good, freaking all stars, true masters of your crafts. I think that you talked not only with, insight, but also in a plain speak way that I think really landed well. So, Johnny, what kind of questions do we have from the viewers?
Let me jump back in here with you guys. Excellent job. We've got some newer folks to contextual advertising as well as some advanced individuals on this call. So to start off with a kind of a basic blocking and tackling question. Can you describe one of the contextual campaigns that really resonated with you and why? Is there a campaign that really stood out as, wow, this is classic contextual advertising and I loved it because X, Y, Z.
I have an example that is not about RMT, but it's more about Taboola. Back in the day, it was around 1999, there was a thing called Studio One that was doing branded content and digital. Andrew Sussman was the guy. And one of the clients was Carnation Instant, no, it was Nestle baby formula. And the content was all about babies. And what they said in every issue of that digital magazine was, if you can breastfeed, do that rather than use our product. But if you can't or don't want to breastfeed, then we have the best product to use. And that got fabulous results.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. Let's move on to a kind of a blending of the disciplines question. Obviously, we're a performance marketing association, and performance marketers are now implementing contextual advertising. Is there an optimal blend of contextual advertising and traditional performance marketing methods for audience traditional performance marketing methods of audience targeting that can supercharge a campaign? Like, is there a blend where you kind of do performance and contextual, and it really outputs way better than doing one or the other?
Yeah, I would say, oh, go ahead, Ben.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's an element of we're now capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time, right? And I think that's what we've been working on at Taboola for the past 15 years, and it's something that's like in primacy of focus right now. As we think about the future and we think about how we implement AI as part of our bidding tools and our recommendations and how we're engaging audiences. So I think that the answer to that question is that I don't think you necessarily have to choose anymore. And that's a wonderful thing, right? Like we are moving into a world of increasingly intelligent automated bidding, right? Where multiple inputs, multiple factors can be taken into consideration at any given point in a microsecond. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that at Taboola in terms of like the intelligence that we're gaining from our algorithms. And I think someone said this earlier, I think it's a really exciting time to be in advertising in that regard.
100%.
That's great. Dan, did you want to add to that?
I would just add, it's exactly that point. We're in a very fertile ground for being able to identify various methods that work without much skin off our back, right? And so the idea of sell-side decisioning is obviously a very intriguing concept on being able to yield more scale, matching at the SSP level or at the publisher level, as opposed to the DSP. If I can get 15, 20% more audience, well, that's going to inherently probably perform better. Now, that's not necessarily contextual targeting, which one works better, but the ability for advertisers now to do a blend of both and toy with which ratio makes the most sense to yield obviously greater results. It's so nuanced because every single, especially in our space, everybody is so unique in terms of what their goals are, what their needs are, who their audience might be, how they engage with their ads, what their messaging is. And so I think more than anything else, being able to explore and test these various solutions to find your magic elixir, as I've alluded to before, is key. The ability to do that without much risk these days, I think, is really, really attractive for a lot of advertisers. And so, contextual is incredibly important, but it's not the only solution. The ability to identify other solutions that might fit in the pie somewhere, not necessarily just about the media mix anymore. It's maybe about how we identify the users the most elegant and efficient way, and let that obviously allocate your budgets accordingly.
Just to add onto those, I totally agree, statements. Something that we've all said earlier today, I think, is the ability to learn, to measure the results and to measure them as quickly as possible so you can re-optimize in flight, so you accelerate learning. I mean, we've just teamed up, we haven't announced it yet, I guess this is a sneak announcement, that we're partnering with a company called Infinitum, where within 10 minutes after each ad exposure, it appears in their dashboard, and they can pick up response from any device in the household. It doesn't have to be through the TV set. So we'll be able to learn faster about, okay, we know the motivations. We were using 3 motivation audiences. This one's working better than the other. Shift weight to that one. This creative is working better. These channels are working better. The faster you learn those things, the more you can put it all together for optimized to maximize the outcome, whatever the KPI is.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated. Let's move to the word big brother and the scary sometimes word privacy. What concerns, if any, do you have of privacy regulations mucking up the advancements in contextual advertising? Is that a concern? Is that not a concern?
Well, content-based buying is more or less immune to the privacy concern.
I think it's one of the
buying is what's
that's pervious to it right now in a way. Yeah, I would agree.
So ultimately, it's actually an opportunity when performance marketers are worried about targeting and privacy rights of the consumer. This is a giant area that contextual can really help out in and fill that void.
I think, look, depending on which vertical you're in, you can be a sharper end of the stick on that one or not. Sometimes it depends which state you would live in as well.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. We're going through that right now with the Click to Council rules and regulations on subscription-based modeling. And not only is there a national approach to how this model should work, there's 50 different states that have their own ideas on how this should work as well, which makes it incredibly challenging. Let's do one more together. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you for your time. Let's talk a little bit about misconceptions. And obviously, we're a performance-driven marketing association. With that mindset, what's the biggest misconception performance marketers still have about utilizing contextual advertising, if there's one at all?
The only thing I would maybe say, and this is not a general statement, but in some cases it may come up, is that it's maybe an antiquated way of looking at things. Is there a better way to identify the audience? Can we be smarter about this? And I think that's why we're having this exact conversation, in that this is actually very smart. It is actually the right way to identify an audience that maybe isn't identifiable by first or third party data or cookie data, or, and so it's I think explaining that contextual maybe sounds like local cable DRTV 20 years ago, but in actuality, it is as powerful and as precise in many cases, depending of course on the vertical in the instance, as finding an audience as first party data matching. And that I think is a conversation and an educational thing that will come up a lot with certain advertisers in the space.
That's great. That's great. Well, guys, phenomenal session. Chris, Bill, Dan, Ben, thank you so much for your expertise, your knowledge, and all the information that you shared with us today. We truly appreciate it. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. Before we close out, I'd like to take a moment to invite you to join us at our next episode of the PDMI Take 20, which is hosted on Wednesday, March 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Also, if you're dreaming of warmer weather, and I know many of you guys out there are, I'd like to remind you that PDMI Spring Conference PDMI East is scheduled for April 13th to 15th in Miami. I hope to see you there at the beautiful Eden Rock Hotel. Tropical water, toes in the sand, drinks in the hand. Sounds pretty good, right? To get your attendee badge, and hotel room, please visit thepdmi.com. That's thepdmi.com. And as a friendly reminder, March 6th, the cutoff date to get your hotel rooms at the $339 per night room rate, or the group rate that PDMI has, which is a 50% savings off the published rates online. Again, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.